at first that would have carried the death penalty. Those counts were ultimately dismissed. But so, agreeing to a plea on the stalking charges is a pretty far departure from what was initially charged. All that being said, with this judge in particular, even if Mangione does plead guilty and gets whatever leniency he gets for accepting responsibility, I do not see him getting any sort of a sweetheart deal here. He is still facing an incredibly long time in prison, possibly up to a life sentence, and I don't think he'll be getting a significant break.
I mean, if you had to game it out, how likely is it that his lawyers would be able to dismiss some or all of the charges in the state case by pleading guilty here?
Yeah, so this really resurrects their argument that he is facing double jeopardy. If he is convicted by means of a guilty plea in the federal case, it is absolutely not a given that the state charges would go forward. New York's double jeopardy law is a lot more favorable to defendants than it is on the federal side. So that's why many experts had said, having the state trial go first really made sense, because there would be no bar then for the federal case following it. But if the federal case is resolved, he has at least a good faith argument to make in front of the state court judge that these state charges are now exactly the same criminal act or transaction that he pled guilty to in the federal case, and that he shouldn't go. So, I don't think it's 100% likely, but he certainly has a better argument than he does now.
Joe, let's bring you in here. Word of a possible plea deal started circulating maybe a couple of weeks ago, but those talks reportedly fell apart. Kind of stunning how quickly this has all come together here.
Yeah, and actually we can kind of look at the images that are inside the courtroom now. Our team's in there. They tell us the defense team is back in the courtroom. They had arrived. They had gone to meet with Mangione in a private cell outside of the courtroom. They're now back in. The defense team is talking with prosecutors. They're shaking hands. Our team basically says that this adversarial relationship up till now seems to have melted away. So that might be a sign of what we're about to see once this hearing gets underway. It was our colleagues at NBC New York who in June started reporting that there were some sort of talks underway between federal prosecutors and Mangione's team. At one point, a deal did seem close in June. Then that seemed to go away. Obviously, either talks went away and picked up later or just continued. It's maybe not surprising now that we've gotten to this point with the state trial so close. If Mangione's attorneys wanted to use this argument that, hey, we have a federal plea deal now because of double jeopardy, the state case needs to go away, they really needed to move now. You have to wonder, and we keep asking this question, why would federal prosecutors want this? Both Steph and Barrett laid out some of the arguments here. It is important to look at the context of this case. The state was involved with it. Then suddenly federal prosecutors came in. A lot of people questioned that. There were initially 4 counts here, and one of those counts, the one of murder through use of a firearm, that was the one that carried the potential for a death penalty. Once the judge earlier this year dismissed that charge, then the death penalty was totally off the table. A lot of people said, well, maybe why do federal prosecutors need to be involved here? If this case gets settled up here in the next few days, clears the way to see what happens with the state case.
Angela, let's reframe the best and worst possible scenarios from the Mangione perspective here.
So look, there is a worst case scenario here where there's no actual plea deal, but he's just going to plead guilty, in which case the sentencing would not necessarily be reduced. It would just be up to the judge. So I'm not sure if we know yet whether or not a plea deal has been reached or if just he's going to have this open plea of guilt in the court. Now, the reason why he would be doing that, though, is because, as we've discussed, this state trial is upcoming. It is supposed to start September 8th, but only if this is resolved. And note, his defense attorneys actually tried to resolve this double jeopardy issue earlier, but the state judge said this cannot be addressed until the federal case is resolved. So it could be that he is still just doing this guilty plea without even having a deal in order to move forward with the state trial, because the state trial is that murder charge. So the worst case scenario, he admits everything openly in court that's used against him at the state trial. He gets no reduction in sentence, and he just gets double sentences from both.
Let's go back to the courthouse because Stephanie Gosk is there, and she has got some information for us about the family of Brian Thompson there in the courthouse discussing the case with U.S. attorneys. What's happening?
Yeah, that's right, Christine. So we've learned that Brian Thompson's mother, Pat Thompson, is among the family members who are in court. We know that they've been conferring with the U.S. attorney. There would have been a lot of coordination between the family and the U.S. attorney. In federal court, the family is allowed to be a part, it is required to be a part of this process. How they feel about a plea deal, they can interject and contribute to that negotiation. We don't know exactly what the U.S. attorney was saying, but they were conferring with each other, most likely discussing how things are going to play out once Luigi Luigi Mangione makes his way into the courtroom, Christine.
Can you give us a little sense, Steph, about who is arriving there? I mean, these Mangione appearances in the past have had a flavor of spectacle sometimes, with actual fandom in some cases. What are you seeing there?
Most definitely, Christine. That's a good way of putting it. You know, there are people that some of them have been here since last night to be in place so they could get a seat in this hearing. And we have seen that every time there's a hearing, every time, whether it's in state court or federal court, we see some of his supporters. They call themselves the Mangionistas, and they have been coming to show their support for Luigi Mangione. He also, as you know, has a legal fund that was started even before he was named as a possible killer in this case. And that fund has now raised more than $1.5 million. And so that has created this atmosphere outside of court where we see oftentimes the same faces and those people lined up, spending a lot of time here waiting to get in for this moment that could be so pivotal, completely changing the judicial process for this case, what happens here today in this courtroom.
Joe, this case from the very beginning has gotten so much attention, and his attorneys have actually asked, Mangione's attorneys have asked for this state trial to be televised. How's all that going to work?
It kind of builds a little bit off what Steph was saying there, too, this sort of groundswell of support for Mangione. I mean, I should note, she didn't mention here, one of the people in line today was seen deboning a fish while waiting in line. So it does certainly draw a number of characters there. So Mangione's attorneys had actually been arguing in court this should be live streamed and televised. We should note, in New York criminal court, those proceedings just generally are not televised. That's the way the state law is here. Obviously, federal court not televised either. That's why we're not seeing anything come out of there today. Mangione's attorneys were basically arguing for the televised trial. They were referring to what they called the court's secret process. They say it grants access to only 68 journalists, saying it doesn't represent the scores of independent journalists who have an interest in covering these proceedings. Obviously, those independent journalists have fueled some of the support that we've seen for Mangione over the years. Prosecutors basically shot back against this. They called that essentially a baseless accusation. They said this can spread information. It can delegitimize the proceedings. In the end, the judge did say there will be an overflow room in this state trial. So that means more people can get in. They will have a live stream within the courthouse to see what's going on. But this is not going to be live streamed at the state level if this state trial does move forward.
Angela, let's go back and remind our viewers about the charges here. 2 federal charges, stalking charges, and then the charges in the state case, 8 felony charges there. And that's where there's this count of second-degree murder. And there had been reports that members of Brian Thompson's family wanted a murder conviction here. Walk us through the differences of these 2 charges.
Yeah, so first, his defense attorneys were able to get the strongest charge on both sides dismissed, right? So the murder charge federally gone. So the murder charge only still stands at the state level. Now, not only is there murder, there's also small charges as well of criminal possession of a firearm and also criminal possession of other items that are felony. But so the biggest issue there obviously is murder. But at the federal level, it's just stalking because they were able to get the murder charge dismissed.
And he had pleaded not guilty to all those federal charges, and that's where we are here right now, where we're expecting a guilty plea. Stay with us, everybody. I want to bring in former Superior Court Judge and U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb. From a judge's perspective, what would you want to hear from the defense today?
Yeah, well, what I would expect the judge will want to hear is some sort of, well, of course, the defendant has to admit the elements of the crime, but for sentencing purposes and for legal decisions about how this case is going to proceed in the future, I would imagine that the judge wants to hear why the defendant is pleading guilty in this case. And it doesn't surprise me that the federal government wanted this case to be resolved before the state case, but look at the big picture. What could potentially happen here is that at the end of the day, this defendant will walk away with 2 stalking charges as a conviction. He may do a long time in prison, but it is potentially true that he would never actually be convicted of murder, which is actually what he did, because as your other commentators have pointed out, the New York state laws are quite favorable to the defendant in these double jeopardy motions. So I think that's what the family is thinking, is that why isn't he answering for the actual crimes that he committed?
I mean, as a judge, how would you approach the double jeopardy concern after this? I mean, this must be in the atmosphere for everything that's happening here today.
Yeah, well, it's a strictly legal issue, and there's going to have to be a lot of parsing about what actually the charges are in the stalking and what he actually admits to, because this isn't a slam dunk federal case on stalking. Stalking federally requires some sort of anticipation by the victim, that some sort of fear on their part. And in this case, it appears that Mangione simply shot the victim in the back. I mean, there was no actual fear leading up to it. So it's not a slam dunk federal case, which is probably why they're willing to take the plea in it. So it's not really a question for the federal judge to decide what's going to happen with the state court. The state court, it is the state court judge who's going to have to look very carefully at the charges that were alleged and the facts that were admitted by the defendant to decide whether or not he's guilty of these crimes. What I really don't like to see in these kinds of cases is a lack of cooperation between the federal and the state prosecutors. That makes everything a little bit fraught and a little bit messy. And unfortunately, I think that's what we have here.
And there had been some time, Your Honor, where they had been, each team had been operating as if theirs was the only set of charges here, and that has led us to where we are today. You also have experience as a federal prosecutor. What do you think the prosecution strategy is today?
Yeah, well, I think the prosecution's strategy should be to get, quote, the best deal they can. So in other words, they should be giving up as little as possible, and they should be getting as much as possible. So I hope the situation is not simply that they've given away the store, so to speak, and agreed to a lower sentence, lower than he deserves. That would be a surprise to me, but it's possible that they're taking that position simply because they are concerned about the legal arguments here on the stalking. Again, what I don't like to see is a situation where they've sort of pulled the rug out from the state case so that they can kind of come out and claim victory in a way that is going to jeopardize the prosecutions, and I say that in the plural, the prosecutions as a whole. That's what we're going to have to listen for this morning.
Very good analysis. Stay with us. Everyone stay with us. I want to go back to the courthouse where Stephanie Gosk is there, and we're told Luigi Mangione is now in the courtroom. What are you seeing and hearing? What's our reporting?
Yeah, Christine, Luigi Mangione making his appearance a little bit late in the courtroom. He's wearing tan prison scrubs and he's shackled, unlike how we've been seeing him in the state court where he showed up in a suit and didn't look like he'd just come out of prison. This is a very different scene here. Also, keep in mind, you have Brian Thompson's family, including his mother, in this courtroom right now. And this is the first time they are coming face to face with the man who allegedly killed Brian Thompson. And what we're being told right now in court is people are shaking their heads, that they have looks of perhaps anger on their faces. It's hard to imagine what must be running through their minds as this all plays out here today and how intense it must be, Christine.
All right, Steph, we'll continue to let you monitor what's happening there. And as Steph said, this is the first time Brian Thompson's family have been in the same room as the man accused of killing their son, although the federal charges are not an accusation necessarily point blank, Joe, of killing their son, but of stalking their son and leading to his demise. Remind me about Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, an Iowa kid from humble beginnings who rose to the top of corporate America.
Yeah, he grew up in the same state that you grew up in Iowa. He went to the University of Iowa. He eventually made his way to my home state, Minnesota, where he worked as a CPA for some time for an accounting firm. It was 2004, 20 years before his death, that he started working for UnitedHealthcare, held a number of positions there, was eventually elevated to the position of CEO, reaching that position in 2021, about 3 years before he was murdered. He was known as a guy, and I thought the New York Times interviewed someone who knew him well, who said he was the smartest guy in the room without being annoying. So that was kind of the way he was described. People who knew him called him BT. He was described as humble. He was described as a hard worker. He was an amateur wrestler, like a lot of people from Iowa and Minnesota. And he was known for even challenging colleagues to arm wrestling, according to some of the profiles about him. So clearly a beloved man. He had 2 young boys, and they all lived in Minnesota for quite a period of time, which is, of course, where UnitedHealthcare is based.
Yeah, of course. Let's go back to Stephanie. She's there following all the developments and what's happening now. We know this was all supposed to start at 11, a little bit behind schedule, but the judge has entered the courtroom.
That's right, Christine. The judge entered, asked everyone to rise, as is always the case in a courtroom, and the hearing is about to begin. And what can we start to look for? So the judge is going to start asking questions about this plea deal and is going to ask Luigi personally if he agrees to a plea deal. They're going to talk about the parameters of that deal. There are going to be questions on whether he understands what the process is going to be. And remember, we don't know what the parameters of this deal are going to be. So we don't know if he is going to plead guilty to both charges, one charge, or maybe something slightly different. So we will be waiting to hear. And the judge will then ask Luigi Mangione, in his own words, to describe what it is that he did. And keep in mind, he is going to be, in his own words, talking about this alleged crime with Brian Thompson's family listening to him in the courtroom. That drama is going to unfold. We also might hear how the family feels about this plea deal. They are allowed, as part of the federal process, to be a part of it. And we've already seen the U.S. attorney talking to the family, probably explaining what was going to happen over the course of this hearing. But it is happening right now as we speak, Christine.
Stand by. Let's go back to Barrett Berger. What, from the perspective of the prosecution, what's their thinking? What's happening right now?
Yeah, so in many ways, this will proceed, if in fact this is a guilty plea, in many ways this will proceed just like every other case does. By the time that they've reached the plea stage, the prosecutor's sort of hard work is kind of done. They'll explain to the judge the parameters of any agreement, if there is in fact an agreement. They'll also have to put forth on the record what the elements are, how they think that this agreement satisfies the element. They may have to put forth what they think the anticipated guideline range is, and that means what the potential sentence could be.
All right, let's go to Stephanie Gosk now. Steph, what do you got?
Yeah. So what we are now learning is that the judge asked Luigi Mangione, are you prepared to plead guilty to counts 1 and 2 of the indictment? So those are the 2 counts. Mangione said yes. So right now we have confirmation from Luigi Mangione that this is a plea deal, and he has agreed to plead guilty to both of those stalking charges leading to death.
Good morning. We are coming on the air with a major update in the case of accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione. Mangione in a federal courtroom right now for a high-stakes hearing where he has just informed a federal court judge that he will, in fact, plead guilty to 2 counts. He was charged with 2 counts of stalking related to a death back in 2024. He is in court right now. The judge asking him a series of questions, asking him, are you prepared to plead guilty to counts 1 and counts 2 of the indictment? Mangione answering yes. We should mention there are no cameras in federal courtroom, and so we are relying on our team of reporters who are fanned out all in downtown Manhattan. And so we are reading from notes that are being transcribed from our team there. The judge saying, I'm going to ask you some questions. It's essential that I'm comfortable. The judge required here to make sure that this plea is knowing and voluntary and that Mangione understands the gravity of what he is in fact pleading guilty to right now. Mangione was facing those federal stalking charges, as I mentioned, in connection with the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson back of 2024. Today's development happening in federal court, but this is also happening just weeks before the state trial against Mangione was supposed to begin here in New York. That trial is supposed to begin on September 8th. In that case, it's a state case, different charges, a whole set of different legal ramifications, which we are going to unpack for you all throughout this morning. I'm going to bring in here NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris, who has been following this case and following along with us as we're unpacking the notes here. We had wondered what, in fact, would happen. We had seen potential plea talks collapse before in this case, but in fact, he is informing the judge that he will now, in fact, plead guilty today.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, Laura, is that the judge had asked, will you be pleading guilty to the 2 counts in the indictment? So there's been a lot of conjecture. What could a plea deal look like? Would prosecutors offer something, maybe some sort of lesser charge? That does not appear to be the case. Not surprising, given the severity of this case. But this means that he's pleading guilty to these federal stalking charges, which potentially carry a life sentence. Now, what we're seeing unfold in the courtroom, and again, we're via our notes. I wish we could watch it in person, but watching it unfold, this is going going through the typical plea hearing process. The judge is asked, are you prepared to plead guilty to the indictment? Then you have the defendant talking about his mental state. Is there anything that has made it so he cannot competently enter into this plea deal today, asking a whole bunch of questions about whether or not he has taken any substances. This is to ensure that he's coming in, he's voluntary, of clear mind. This is all on the record. She'll be asking, did he have time to confer with his counsel? The next step will be going through the charges, the penalties. Then we will get to the meat, Laura. It will be the plea agreement. What has been agreed to between the prosecution and the defense. Now, what to listen for and watch for as this unfolds, there's going to be a factual basis for the plea. And when the judge says at the outset of this, as we see that Luigi Mangione intends to plead guilty, she's going to have questions. She's going to have to be satisfied. That factual basis means Luigi Mangione will have to admit to certain facts that fulfill all of the elements of a stalking charge, that fulfill the elements of the crime. And the judge is going to probe into that to make sure that what ends up on that record is sufficient for the plea. So just because the prosecution and the defense have agreed upon something, it still has to be approved by the judge in this case. And this judge is actively going to be involved in asking some questions about it.
Which would be a huge moment in any case. But in this case in particular, this is somebody whose attorneys have been aggressive, who have been zealous advocates time and again, saying that their client has done nothing wrong, saying that he is not guilty, that they are going to fight this tooth and nail. They've talked about why he shouldn't be prosecuted in all these jurisdictions. And yet in court today, he is rising as the judge is asking him a series of questions, saying, have your attorneys explained the guilty plea? Mangione saying yes, asking him, as you mentioned, satisfied with your attorneys, making sure that he's getting proficient counsel. Mangione saying yes, asking him, understanding that the Constitution and the laws, you have a right to plead not guilty. Do you understand? Mangione saying yes. Again, that you would not have to prove your innocence. That's the prosecution's burden. Mangione saying yes. All of these sort of series, the colloquy with the judge, all there to tease out, to make sure you understand what you're doing.
Exactly.
One of the most important things is going to be, after all this is said and done, he doesn't get to say, take back. He doesn't get to say second thoughts. That's why they have to go through this in such level of detail.
Absolutely. And that's why you're seeing this unfold. All of these constitutional rights that Luigi Mangione has as a defendant in the criminal justice system, he is waiving them. And the judge is going through one by one so that he understands what he is doing and what he is waiving moving forward. There will be a section where they'll talk about, well, you can't appeal this moving forward. Yeah. You understand that. You're waiving those rights. And to your point, Laura, they don't want any wiggle room here. They don't want it to be that something was left outside in that courtroom, left out in that record that can support this determination if Luigi Mangione has buyer's regret one day. All of it will be in this court record, the judge meticulously going through all of these inquiries. And this part of the colloquy is really, really important regarding those constitutional rights. This is a part where it is made clear that you will be admitting guilt. The prosecutors will no longer have the burden to prove this.
Again, a first. We've never, ever, ever heard him do anything close to that. And not only is he doing it, he's doing it in open court in front of the victim's family, in front of Brian Thompson's family and colleagues.
Yes, and we saw some of the color from what we heard in the courtroom is that when he walked in, the family looked visibly upset when Luigi Mangione walked into the room. What was going to happen as this hearing unfolds, as this plea hearing unfolds, there's going to be a summary of this agreement. And this is something I really want to be paying attention to. Yeah. The language in this agreement. What do we have here? Now we know that Luigi Mangione is pleading guilty to the charges as they stand in the indictment. Because that is new information.
He could have pled to something else. Just because he was charged with stalking, resulting in death, doesn't mean that that's what he would have had to agree to. But so the fact that he's actually pleading to the thing he was indicted for is a big deal.
Yes, he's pleading guilty to the top charges. So a lot of times when you see a plea agreement, there's some kind of bargaining going on between the defense and the prosecution. The defense is saying, well, we will plead guilty. And it's all about penalty at the end of the day, right? It's all about what will the penalty be. We'll plead guilty to something lesser than these top charges, and you prosecutors will get the benefit of not having to go through the trial. Trial's unpredictable, all of that. Here, That is not the case. So we are seeing a guilty plea to the actual charges, the top level charges that Luigi Mangione faces. So there had been a question mark about what that would look like. He's pleading guilty to these top charges. Those could potentially carry a life sentence. Doesn't look like, at least from where we see right now this unfolding, it doesn't look like there's anything to indicate that there's lesser charges that are even at play. That's out the window now. These are the top level charges that he's pleading guilty to.
And again, top level charges, we say it's stalking, but it is stalking resulting in death.
Correct.
It is a federal charge that is quite serious, that carries up to life in prison. So this is no small thing.
No small thing at all. So what I'm going to be listening for, and I'm curious about this as we get into now kind of the nuts and bolts here. The parties are announcing their appearances, which means we're going to be getting into some of the meat of what this plea agreement looks like. Okay, so now we know he's pleading guilty to the charges that he faces, top level charges, no haircut there or anything. So that's what is going to be the actual plea that he will enter to those charges. Will there be something in that plea agreement that says prosecutors will make recommendations that will help him at sentencing, maybe agree to certain mitigating factors, maybe agreeing to making some kind of recommendation that would make this something less than life, which I think is probably the best that he could do under these particular circumstances from a defense perspective.
Because when people think tit for tat, right? I got something, you got something. As if we're reading this right now, it appears prosecutors got exactly what they wanted, which is they're getting him to plead guilty in open court to the very same charges that they indicted him for. We don't yet know, though, what is he getting from this side of the bargain? What is he getting from this deal that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise? Because as of right now, in his, again, exchange with the judge here, the judge is saying, you give up your right to appeal. There will be no trial. I will sentence you after the pre-sentence report, which is something that probation puts together. It makes a series of recommendations. That's not going to happen today. But the judge, again, she's clarifying there will be no appeal. Do you understand that? And he's saying yes.
Yes, he's saying yes. He agrees to, and he agrees that he understands all of the constitutional rights that he is waiving. And this is really, really important. And again, Laura, that's why you have such an extensive back and forth with the judge in these cases to ensure that somebody who is waiving their rights to appeal, waiving constitutional rights as a criminal defendant, they know what they're doing. They've had the opportunity to speak to their counsel about it. They understand what this actually means. And that's why this part of the hearing, it seems procedural. It's incredibly important.
Well, because we have actually seen things in past high-profile cases in this moment actually break down, right? So it seems sort of pro forma, like she's going through all of these, he's saying yes. There have been times in cases you and I have covered where the judge is pressing them, and it turns out like, oh, actually, I didn't quite understand what I was giving up. And so it actually is necessary to go through all of this, even if it seems sort of rote.
You're absolutely correct. And that's such an important point. And all of this goes into the record. And the judge, ultimately, who's going to make that determination, the judge doesn't just have to be satisfied with what the parties, prosecution and defense agreed to with respect to all of the aspects of a plea agreement. The judge also has to be satisfied that this defendant is knowingly and voluntarily entering into that deal. And that's why you see such an intensive back and forth on all of these issues.
Yeah, I want to bring in here into the discussion NBC's senior national correspondent, Stephanie Gosk, who has been following this case from the very beginning. Stephanie, I remember those days during the manhunt where you were posted outside Altoona, Pennsylvania. You know this case as well as any of us. Right. Talk to me about the scene that is outside of court right now. Mangione has garnered an enormous amount of support since this case first happened. What are you seeing outside court?
Yeah, it has been pretty amazing, and no less so today. And there were people, Laura, who were lined up late at night to get a seat in this courtroom today. They used the courtroom, the largest courtroom in this federal courthouse, to fit everyone. We saw Brian Thompson's family be escorted into the courtroom through a side door, including his mother. We know that there are also UnitedHealthcare executives in that courtroom. Obviously, you have the federal prosecutors and the defense team. And then Luigi Mangione was brought in. He was shackled. He was wearing tan prison clothes. Now, during the state case, he has been showing up in a suit. He was striking a very different figure and is striking a very different figure in court today. And this is the first time, mind you, that Brian Thompson's family has been in the same room face to face with who we now know is the killer of Brian Thompson, because he has admitted to being involved in the death of Brian Thompson by admitting to these charges. What also has happened today, you are seeing the roadmap towards a federal and state trial in these cases be totally blown up. We were expecting a state trial September 8th, a federal trial in January, and now for certain the federal trial will not be taking place. But there are real questions now on whether the state trial will happen. At a bare minimum, you have to imagine that that September 8th date is going to slide down the road. And there's a very good chance, because of double jeopardy law in the state of New York, which is quite robust and in favor of the defendant, that there could be no state trial at all. In other words, Luigi Mangione, the man who killed Brian Thompson brazenly in Midtown Manhattan in December 2024, will not actually stand trial for that crime.
Stephanie, as you mentioned, the family is in the courtroom. Colleagues of Brian Thompson are in the courtroom. This is really the first opportunity that I can think of where they have had a direct confrontation, obviously not talking face to face, but being in the room while he is pleading guilty to these crimes. This is a remarkable moment for this family.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine, and you can't, and impossible, to put yourself in the shoes of his family, his mother sitting there watching Luigi Mangione stand up and say, yes, I am responsible for this death. We also really haven't heard from the executives of UnitedHealthcare and his family members since the immediate days after Brian Thompson's murder. You did hear from his wife, who said a few things, but other than that, they have been very silent along in this process. Now, as part of the federal plea deal process, the family of the victim is allowed to be a part of that process, to interject and have an opinion in that process. You can see before this hearing even began, the U.S. attorneys were conferring with the family, probably outlining what was going to happen over the course of this hearing. They are very much involved, and they're here today, and it has to be incredibly emotional and intense for them, Laura.
Incredibly emotional, and under the laws, Misty, they're actually required to be consulted about this.
Yes.
Now, they might object. They might say, oh, no, we actually want this to go to trial. The judge doesn't have to accept that, but the judge does have to be giving them a reasonable opportunity to be heard.
Yes. So the Crime Victims' Rights Act says prosecutors have to let the family know that there's a plea, that they have to consult and confer with the family, reasonable opportunity to be heard. All of that is absolutely true. And so the family would not be, blindsided by something like this, which is why we see them in the courtroom today. Something I think is really interesting going on in the courtroom. They're talking about penalty. The judge is saying this could be up to life. And in federal court, if you get life, there is no parole. That might not be the sentence. Also, if you have a state court case, it could be consecutive, meaning the two sentences might not run at the same time. So really letting Luigi Mangione know the import of, the gravity and what the potential penalty could be.
Talk to me quickly about the state case. You heard Stephanie mention it. The state case was supposed to happen on September 8th, just a few weeks from now. The timing of this really matters, because now that he has in fact pleaded guilty and he will have a conviction on his record in federal court. Talk to me about the interplay and what he hopes that will do for him in the state case.
So this only works one way, Laura. Getting this federal case wrapped up, a plea, which is a conviction, means that Luigi Mangione and his defense team can take advantage of the New York state law on double jeopardy, which is way more expansive than its federal counterpart. So it only works if the federal case is resolved first while the state court case is pending. What the law says is that somebody cannot be prosecuted twice for a crime that is part of the same transaction or occurrence. So the defense team is undoubtedly going to use this plea. Timing matters. It's before this state case goes to trial, to try and get the state case thrown out in its entirety.
You think we will see that today, even if we don't get the sentencing of Mangione today?
Yes, I think we will see a filing in state court that will say, we got to put this trial on pause while it plays out. Yes, right? Because state prosecutors are going to fight back on that double jeopardy. So that's going to take a while to play out. I think we'll see a filing immediately from the defense in that state case to say, we just pled guilty in the federal case. We're going to have to deal with the double jeopardy issue. That's not going to be resolved by the
judge doesn't want to seat a jury and go through a jury trial and have all of that happen, only to have it all fall apart because Mangione says, actually, no, you can't prosecute me in the state case, and then have an appeals court disagree with him.
Right. And then not to mention, double jeopardy is a fundamental right. So a question mark on that would give the judge incentive to say, we'll push this back while that all plays out.
Misty, appreciate your analysis. As always, so helpful. Steph, thanks to you, too. That concludes this NBC News special report. Our coverage continues on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCNews.com. And a full wrap-up, of course, tonight on Nightly News with Tom Yamas. I'm Laura Jarrett. Thank you for watching.
You've been watching an NBC News special report. Luigi Mangione preparing to plead guilty in the federal case against him. Those charges on your screen: interstate stalking resulting in death and stalking through use of interstate facilities resulting in death. The charges carry a maximum penalty of life in prison. The question now, what happens next, both with his sentencing and the state case with 8 felony charges expected to begin next month. Joining us now is former Superior Court Judge and U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb and our whole team here. Let's go to talk to what's going on here right now, Joe Ferrer. We're looking at our reporters in the room and our producers in the room have been sending notes back and forth about what's actually happening inside the room, and we've been following along.
Yeah, a reminder, this is federal court. Cameras are not allowed in court, so we have our team in there. They are able to access a Google document, so we're able to watch as they're typing. And literally right now, Mangione is starting to speak, according to our team there. We don't know much about what's being said, but I can just tell you the first words we're hearing out of his mouth after answering a series of questions, saying yes and no to various questions. After years of enduring severe pain with the back and witnessing the healthcare system, on December 4th, I went to an investor conference, specific location that was not publicly disclosed. The judge interrupts, I can't hear you, and he continues to speak. We don't have any more than that right now, but this is certainly going to be perhaps the most captivating part of this, is actually hearing Mangione say what happened as he prepares to lay out this guilty plea. Leading up to this moment, the judge has been asking a series of questions over the course of several minutes. First, trying to better understand sort of his state of mind and make sure that he's in condition, asking, have you been treated for addiction, any drugs, alcohol, or pills in the last 2 days? And Mangione said, I took sleep medication. The judge following up to make sure, is your mind clear? Are you okay? And the judge determining that he felt he was okay, that the defendant was fully competent to enter the plea at this time. And then just making sure he understood what he was giving up by entering this plea here, understanding that if there was a trial, he could object to certain evidence, that he would have the right to testify or not to testify. And a key moment that came down in just the last few moments here, right before Mangione started to speak, was the judge saying, I have this letter from your attorneys that was given to the prosecutor. He asked him if he'd seen it and discussed it. The government saying 292 to 365 months imprisonment is what's listed in that letter. So that's 24 to 30 years here. Those are the government's guidelines. They're not binding. Most importantly, they're not binding for me. In the end, the judge is going to come up with the range on what the sentence is for these charges, saying I may agree with them, I may not agree with them. And he wanted to make sure Mangione understood. Has anyone made any promises to you? Mangione saying, no, no one has made any promises to me about that. So we continue to hear Mangione speaking about traveling to Manhattan, saying he had emailed UnitedHealthcare leadership, posing as an investor with millions in assets, saying he received a response before traveling to New York. He used a 3D printer to make this gun and silencer. A reminder, this was a ghost gun here. He emailed UnitedHealthcare with the intent to shoot Brian Thompson on the morning of December 4th. He says, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan in the back. I understood my actions would place him in fear of death and bodily injury. I knew what I was doing. And those are the last words we've heard so far.
Let's go back to the courthouse. Stephanie Gosk is there. She's been reporting on all of this. What's happening now? What are the new details, Steph?
Yeah, what's important here, Christine, right now is that you have the prosecutors with this recommended sentencing, and you heard Joe just say it, 292 to 365 months. Well, on the upper end of that, that's 30 years. Luigi Mangione's 28. That is not a life sentence. Now, in federal court, it is the judge in a plea deal that is going to determine the sentencing. So it is going to be in her hands ultimately. And you heard her tell that to Luigi Mangione. But it is also important to hear that the prosecutor's recommendation is not life, which is an interesting twist in this. We had assumed all along they were going for life. Remember, they were initially looking for a capital sentence. They were looking for the death penalty in this case. That charge got thrown out. And now they're saying upwards of 30 years in prison. So that is a very different tune, Christine.
And one wonders what the family of Brian Thompson thinks about that, because there's a state case where there are a whole bunch of charges, Steph, for a state case, a trial that was supposed to begin, September 8th, and we don't know what happens now with this guilty plea.
Yeah, what we do know is that there's going to be a whole other process now in state court. That September 8th start date for the trial is at a bare minimum going to move down the road, most likely, because now they have to settle this issue of double jeopardy, and that's going to be up to the state judge. And in the New York State, the protections for the defendant are robust when it comes to double jeopardy. And it could mean that there ends up being no state trial at all in this case. We just don't know how the judge is going to rule on that. But because of the way the law is written, it is in Luigi Mangione's favor. And no doubt that was part of his defense team's strategy, this plea deal in federal court, Christine.
All right, Steph, we'll let you continue to gather information and facts. Angela, I want to bring in you here. So this really throws the state prosecution, those 8 those felonies for this on the state case up in the air.
Yeah, it's very possible, but I want to note that it's definitely not guaranteed. And I think as we heard Joe's reporting, the fact that we heard Mangione say that he knew what he was doing and that there was intent to kill, that is very important for the second-degree murder charge that is happening in state. So now the question of whether or not double jeopardy will apply has to do with whether or not that same transaction really occurred. And the issue is the stalking charges are really just about hunting, right? They're not actually about the killing, whereas a murder charge is about the killing. Now, hearing him say in court, or not hearing, but hearing the reporting of it, that he is admitting to knowing that he did it and knowing that there was intent is also dangerous for this murder charge. If indeed it does not get thrown out, does not get tossed for double jeopardy reasons, he essentially has admitted that he did commit murder. So the possibility there is still that he could be convicted for murder in state court.
Let me bring in Barrett Berger, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst. Barrett, when you've been listening to all of this unfold here, Luigi Mangione saying that he is prepared to plead guilty to these 2 federal charges. You've heard what we've heard from prosecutors about potential penalties, although that will come later. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that he's essentially getting no break with this plea. This is a U.S. Attorney's Office that I would have been shocked if they had given him any kind of a sweetheart deal here. So he's essentially pleading to both of the top counts. He's essentially pleading to the indictment here, just with the plea agreement. So the federal prosecutors are actually getting a huge benefit out of this. The first being they get the fact that he has waived his right to an appeal. So even if they were able to convict him at trial, even if the evidence was as strong as we all suspected it was, there's always a risk on appeal that there was some sort of deficiency in your legal argument. Now they don't have to worry about that. This conviction will be solid. They don't have to stress about that. And also they have the ability to secure a pretty significant sentence. You know, people may be surprised that it's not a life sentence. This is not necessarily the prosecutor's choice. This is a range that's determined by the Sentencing Commission. There's a book that lays out what the various guidelines are for each offense. So it's a pretty mathematical calculation based on his criminal history and what the offense is. Now, at the time of
Barrett, I'm
sentencing,
going to have to cut you off there for just a second. Our Stephanie Gosk is at the courthouse with some more information. I want to get to her live. Hi, Steph.
Hey, Christine. So critically, the judge just agreed to the plea deal. So that was what we were waiting for. The judge has agreed to the plea deal. Right before that was the other thing that we've been talking about this morning, and that's the allocution, where Luigi Mangione was asked by the judge to explain what he did. And his description is chilling. I'm going to read a little bit of it. This is from our producer who's in court transcribing it. He said this. Luigi Mangione said this. In November, I traveled to Manhattan. I emailed UHC leadership, that's UnitedHealthcare leadership, posing as an investor with millions in assets. I received a response before traveling to New York. He says he used a 3D printer to make a gun and silencer. He then emailed UHC back, and he had the intent, he told the judge, of shooting Brian Thompson on the morning of December 4th, 2024. He says, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan in his back. Keep in mind, as Luigi Mangione is saying this, Christine, Brian Thompson's family is in that courtroom listening to this chilling description. I understand, according to Luigi Mangione, my actions would place him in a fear of death and bodily injury. That's obviously very specific legal language that he is using. I knew what I was doing was illegal. That is what the judge was listening to. That is what could potentially be used in the state case. Him outlining the crime itself, Christine.
And we're hearing, Steph, that sentencing has been set for Friday, December 18th at 11 a.m. So this federal case, clearly with some major movement here today. I want to bring in NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett, NBC News legal analyst Misty Marist. Laura, so wow, just a lot of developments here today. So let's talk about what has just happened, and then let's talk about what this means for what was supposed to happen on September 8th, which is a state trial with 8 felony charges, including second-degree murder, which we're told the family wanted to see a murder conviction here.
This is an incredible moment. This is the first time we have heard Luigi Mangione, in his own words, say anything at all, much less provide a robust description of how he, in his own words, is saying he traveled to Manhattan. This is a level of premeditation that we have never heard from Mangione before, because, again, until this day, he has been pleading not guilty. He has maintained his innocence. His lawyers have been aggressive. And yet today, all of that has just changed. He's describing, Christine, not only how he traveled to Manhattan, but how he's actually corresponding with executives at UnitedHealthcare, posing as an investor, creating a ghost gun, using a silencer. Again, all of these details are things we have heard before, but yet they're really going to matter when it comes to the state case. Because in the state case, he's not charged with stalking, Christine. He's charged with second-degree murder, and he's charged with weapons charges. And so when he's talking about the weapons and how he made them and how he's using them in the federal case, he's doing it for a reason. And he's doing it so that when he runs over to state court, probably later today, he can say, see, it was all-encompassing. That deal in federal court, it was robust. It was all-encompassing. So you cannot prosecute me for the same state crime.
And Misty, the judge has agreed to this plea deal. They have a sentencing date, Friday, December 18th. Your thoughts here on the defense's strategy? I mean, the defense has won kind of along the way. They got some charges dropped, and now they've got this guilty plea here in federal court that may upend the state charges.
Yeah, so they've really narrowed what the charges are. As you said, they got the death penalty thrown out in federal court. They got the terrorism charges thrown out in state court. So now they've pled guilty. And this is really strategic, Christine, because it only works one way when it comes to the double jeopardy rules, because the New York law on double jeopardy is the one that's more expansive. So the federal case being done now, we have a plea deal. That's a conviction. Now they can, as Laura said, go to the state court and say, this is the same crime. You cannot charge me twice. That has to be thrown out. Now, that's absolutely going to be a fight between the defense and the prosecutors. But look what they've done. They're pleading guilty. By the way, Luigi Mangione could still get a life sentence, because that's what the sentencing guidelines would allow. A sentence is ultimately up to the judge. And that was very clear during this plea hearing, that you understand the maximum penalty here is life without the possibility of parole, correct? And he said yes. So if they get the state charges thrown out, though, now it's done. It's finality. They know what they're doing. There's a benefit to potentially being in the federal system, maybe better conditions. When sentencing comes, Luigi Mangione is going to be able to say, I took accountability. That will be a mitigating factor. So there's definitely things that inure to his benefit. And let's not forget, there's a ton of evidence in this case. So getting rid of the state case, that would be a win for the defense.
Ladies, stick with me. Stephanie Gosk wants to get in. She's got some new information at the courthouse. Hey, Steph.
Hey, Christina, I just want to say that one of the things that really stands out in his description of what happened in the lead up to this murder is him saying he posed as an investor with millions in assets and that he was in touch with UnitedHealthcare. And one of the lingering questions about this crime generally was why Luigi Mangione knew, or how he knew, to be on the street so early in the morning. Now, that investor conference was set to begin 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 in the morning. Brian Thompson was making his way to that hotel at around 6 a.m. and Luigi Mangione was there. And this illuminates to some degree how he knew where to be, when to be there, and how he had some of these details that really had not been publicized yet. So some real light on that build up to that horrible crime that was captured by security cameras and that we've all seen so many times. Christine.
And just thanks, Steph. And just, guys, the premeditation involved there. I will tell you that since that event in 2024, there's not a CEO in America that doesn't have security, armed security in most cases. And in fact, they are very careful about the traffic, the email traffic that's going to so many of those, because this was such a shocking crime that this CEO, father of two kids, could just be gunned down and brought in early morning in Manhattan. Let's go back to what we're hearing more about Luigi Mangione. We're hearing his words read in court to us. Tell us more about what he is saying happened.
Yeah, it's interesting. We all want cameras in the courtroom. Today of all days is a day that we want cameras in the courtroom, because I'm so looking forward to seeing what our producers say about what is his tone. Is it monotone? Is there an affect to it, right? We just haven't heard that much from him. But he is going through at least some level of detail. And then the prosecutors are talking about him arriving on bus and following him, and the video, and then arriving in Pennsylvania. Again, some of the facts we've heard, but we just have never heard them in his own words. Now, of course, all of this is carefully choreographed with his lawyers. He's not just sort of freelancing this speech that he's giving in court right now. Every word that is coming out of his mouth, Christine, serves a purpose.
You know, Misty, it's so interesting to me, because there is a time these two prosecutions were operating independently of each other, and were operating as if each were the only upcoming case against Luigi Mangione. If you're the state prosecutors, how are you feeling right now?
I am starting to draft my opposition to the motion for double jeopardy to get this case thrown out for that ask for dismissal that is just so predictable right now. As far as the state prosecutors are concerned, they want to be able to prosecute Luigi Mangione for murder. Those are the state charges. They want to bring justice for Brian Thompson and his family. They've made that very clear through a very aggressive state level prosecution. So they're absolutely going to be opposing the defense asking for that state court trial to be thrown out. And Christine, it's not really a slam dunk. You know, this is what I would call a calculated risk by Luigi Mangione's defense team. Because on one hand, okay, he's pled guilty to the federal charges. He could get some credit for doing so. Maybe he gets something less than life, and they try and get the state court case thrown out. There's no guarantee that that will actually happen. There's an exception to that rule about the same transaction or occurrence, and it's that the other prosecution, in this case the state prosecution, seeks to remedy a different type of harm, or there's different elements to the charges. That is why when Laura is talking about the strategy in this factual allocution, Luigi Mangione, in his own words, saying what happened, he's including facts that would tend to give him a better argument on that state double jeopardy motion, because he's saying all this stuff, shooting Brian Thompson, that is all part of my federal plea deal. You can't prosecute me twice. But that is by no means something that is just going to necessarily go away. That will be another legal fight.
We know the family of Brian Thompson is in the courtroom for the first time in the same room as the man who has now just admitted that his stalking action led to the death of Brian Thompson. We know that the parents or the family of Brian Thompson were talking to the U.S. attorneys. One wonders how the family must feel about what has happened here today, especially if they want to see a murder charge.
Well, and it'll be interesting because they do have a reasonable opportunity to be heard, and it's sentencing. Most definitely, I would expect that we would hear from them. We often see in these types of cases a victim impact statement. Some of them can be quite emotional and powerful, where the victim gets up and not only talks about what that has happened to their loved one, but has talked about what that loss has meant for their life. And so I would expect in a case like this, it would not be at all unusual to hear from the victim's family at sentencing.
Yeah.
But we don't yet know, and I'm sure this will come out through reporting, we don't yet know, did they object to this? Did they tell federal prosecutors, please do not do this, we want a federal trial? Or are they hoping they're still going to get some vindication in the state case? Maybe they're hoping, since that's the second-degree murder case, that one will still go forward and they'll still see justice in that way. That's something we're going to have to try to report out.
Remind us why there are two cases. Why? I mean, normally these sorts of cases are charged at the state level. Am I right?
Yes, murder cases are generally falling under state jurisdiction, but there's this doctrine called dual sovereignty, which means if there is a federal theory that fits the facts of the case, a federal case can be brought as well. So here, the reason that you even see federal charges is that he crossed state lines in order to get to Brian Thompson and ultimately commit that murder. So that then falls under that federal jurisdiction. Now, the defense has been arguing and, shouting from the rooftops, especially since the death penalty is taken off the table. It's the stalking charges in federal court, murder charges in state court, that there should not be 2 prosecutions. And that's always been their argument with regard to double jeopardy. But the cases remain because of that doctrine of dual sovereignty. And Christine, that's why the timing, this is not lost on us, that this federal plea deal is happening before that state court case, because they only derive the benefit because the state law is a little bit broader on that front.
And then there's the backdrop of the spectacle of all of this.
Yeah.
Somebody deboning a fish in line today.
We noticed that too.
I mean, just
Jeez.
some of
For the amount of money that he has raised to the tune of $1.5 million for his legal defense fund. Legions of people showing up to court whenever there's a court hearing, even if it's something routine. People who are camped out there in support of him. People who are saying, I too was hurt by the health insurance industry. Again, this is a murder case.
Yeah.
This is now an on-the-record killing of a human being, but people are talking about their experience with the healthcare industry and how it has wronged them. It's quite remarkable, what this has pulled out in people.
Totally. And, when you're talking about prosecutors coming to the table and engaging in these negotiations with the defense, and you say, well, we've got a video of him shooting Brian Thompson in cold blood on the street. Why would you even entertain it? Well, part of it is that trial is truly an unpredictable thing. And I can't think of a case that is more unpredictable to seat a jury and we've been covering cases together for so many years. This case has just really made that mark as far as what you see outside the courtroom, that legal defense fund. And who knows what could happen if you do seat a jury? Do you get that stealth juror who wants to be there so that they can upend a potential verdict? Do you see this movement online of what's called jury nullification? There's a whole movement where people are promoting and letting people know what jury nullification is, which means you think they're guilty, but for a bigger public
Basically,
policy
you don't
reason,
follow
you
the
find
law.
them innocent. You don't listen. So all of that, this backdrop, it helps you to understand why we don't know what the family's position is, but there is some degree when you know there's finality, there's no appeal, you don't have to sit in court and hear all of this 2 times potentially.
Especially if he gets
federal
life,
case.
right? If he wasn't going to get the death penalty anyway, if he does in fact get life, which will be up to the judge. But the real question is, what happens with that state case? Because if they were banking on him still going forward in the state case and the family was okay with the federal plea under the assumption that he would still go forward in the state case, that could all be up in it. But I just don't see how that case goes forward anytime soon.
I mean, when you talk about all the evidence in this case, it's almost overwhelming. The video. Now, he's admitted to sending emails where he found out exactly where Brian Thompson was going to be. And then there's the backpack in the Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's, which had sort of
the writings.
The writings, basically, a play-by-play. I'm just trying to always put myself in the minds of the family of the deceased. And, did they want something more? We just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We know that they were in the courtroom today, and we know from the reporting that there were people from UnitedHealthcare there also. So that's interesting. And that, because the victims in these cases have to be informed, they have to be advised, their opinion is taken into consideration by prosecutors. But it's important to note, while they have the ability to communicate the way they want things to unfold when it comes to a plea deal, it's ultimately up to prosecutors' prosecutorial discretion to make that call. So we might see more about that, though, kind of get a feel for what the position was at sentencing.
And we're going to learn more. The probation department will interview him. And as a part of that, we'll get a lot more information about what happened to this man. What happened to this man who came from a well-to-do family, who starts his immediate sort of colloquy with, after years of enduring severe pain with back and witnessing the healthcare system, the first words out of his mouth is excuses for why he has done this, which I think is fascinating positioning. But what happened in that period in his life where everything seemed to be okay, and then he ends up doing something like this? And there's this dark period of his life that we still have not fully unpacked.
And this story is not over, because now there will be legal wrangling for what happens next in the state trial. Both of you, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. Luigi Mangione pleading guilty to federal charges in the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Sentencing now set for December. NBC News Daily picks up all of this breaking news after a very quick break.
Welcome to NBC News Daily. This Friday, we begin with breaking news in the high-profile Luigi Mangione case. Just moments ago, Mangione pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges linked to the shooting death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. He just stepped outside after spending the morning inside. Sam, what went down? What did Luigi Mangione say in federal court today?
Yeah, Vicky, this was only about 15 or 20 minutes ago that everything just wrapped up. Luigi Mangione, as you said, pleaded guilty to killing Brian Thompson, right? There was a lot of conjecture coming into this as whether or not it was going to be a plea agreement with the federal government. There were obviously these federal stalking charges in connection with someone who died, but was he going to acknowledge Mangione, his role, his agency and intent in actually taking someone else's life? And that is what we just witnessed. Now, I will couch this as saying the judge said it's not a plea agreement. He pleaded guilty, and then the federal government was able to offer what they believe is a proper or appropriate sentencing guidelines, Vicky, which was somewhere between 292 months, I believe, and 365 months, or their framework would be about 25 or 30 years. That's not a life sentence, and it should be noted that the federal stalking charges did come with the possibility of a life sentence, and then Judge Garnett was very clear to make it out to the entire court that it's in her discretion. That's not binding. She's going to be looking at a pre-sentencing report, a probation report, and talking to some of the stakeholders and then make her own decision. But I'll just tell you, Vicky, when Luigi Mangione walked out, he wasn't wearing a suit and tie as we've seen him in recent hearings. He was wearing tan prison garb. He walked up. He barely acknowledged anyone, certainly not the courtroom. He did have a brief exchange with his attorneys, and he sat down. His recitation of why he did this and what actually happened was devoid of any sort of emotion. I mean, his voice was slow. He was offered the option to stand up and read or sit down. He had prepared remarks. Mangione decided to sit down. It was so low at one point the judge said, I apologize, but can you please start over and just project your voice a little more so that we can hear what you're saying. And instead of, I don't know if the expectation was you were going to hear remorse or some sort of context for why he felt the way that he did, or if he felt badly for the family, which, by the way, Brian Thompson's large section of his family, including his ex-wife and his mom, were seated in the front row, 2 rows in front of me. I'm going to get to that in a second. But as Luigi Mangione is describing what he did and why he did it, it wasn't colored really with anything that would be described as emotion. He said, after years of enduring pain from a broken back, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact transcript yet, and observing the pain of others, I learned of this UnitedHealthcare investor conference, and he said instead of nurses and patients attending an event meant to improve national health care, he said it was board of executive members and execs. So you almost felt like he was coloring or providing an excuse as to why he acted the way that he did. That was sort of his opening salvo. From that point onward, he talks about the fact that he had a 3D gun, which he printed outside of New York City and brought with him to New York. And then the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, Vicky, when Luigi Mangione says, I shot Mr. Thompson in December with the intent to kill him. You heard him say those words in cold blood. And without, again, any emotional depth. He was just stating it, reciting it as fact, and effectively concluded his remarks there. If you were thinking that Mangione was going to say more about the impact on family members or how his actions have sort of created these conversations and a paradigm shift in this country, nothing along those lines, just a straight recitation. Another piece of information that we learned, Vicky, that was super fascinating and also jarring is Mr. Mangione said that it wasn't public knowledge where this investor conference was being held. He had to solicit the information by impersonating effectively an investor from a large company. He wrote or emailed UnitedHealthcare and asked and said, I represent this company that has billions of dollars in assets. Where is this conference being held? And they provided, he said, the information. We didn't know any of that. So this is all that came out in court today, while at the same time you have these family members who are seeing Luigi Mangione probably for the first time in months, if not years, in person, in terms of the emotional impact on them. Again, I was sitting behind his ex-wife. I couldn't see her face. I did see, however, her raise her right arm and start dabbing her cheeks. It was very evident that she was crying. At one point, Brian Thompson's mom, who's seated to her right in a black suit, put her arm around Brian's ex-wife, and they were clearly trying to comfort one another. There was probably 8, 9, or 10 different family members in that first row. The row behind them, and this was directly in front of me, was somewhere in the range of 7, 8, or 9 UnitedHealthcare, presumably colleagues, friends, executives who were there in solidarity of the Thompson family. So that was the first 2 rows of that side of the courtroom. But just this sort of surreal sequence where it feels like a crescendo of sorts for an issue that has galvanized the country around conversations about health care coverage, his now purported reasons for why he committed murder, and what it means from here. Again, right, the judge said, you do understand that you have this sentencing guideline. I don't have to adhere to it, but it's 25 to 30 years. And Mr. Mangione, do you understand? You're probably going to have to serve at least 85% of your sentence. He said, yes, I know. I do acknowledge this. And so she also said, you're not allowed to withdraw this. Once you plead guilty, that's it. There's finality. Do you still plead guilty? And there was a brief pause of about 5 seconds. And he said, yes, I plead guilty. And so that's where we leave things right now.
Sam, you were just in the courtroom. I'm going to ask you to stand by as I bring in senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett, along with NBC legal analyst Misty Maris. We just heard what Sam said, some things that we did not know prior to Luigi Mangione speaking out in court today as he entered his guilty plea on these 2 federal stalking charges. I do wonder if it really strengthens the prosecution's case that he said he impersonated an investor, that this was not public information where the UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson was going to be. Is that what they really needed to secure this guilty plea?
It would have been critical had this actually gone to trial. That would have been a really important piece of information. And it's interesting, today is the day that we're sort of getting the first sort of glimpse at the level of planning. We'd reported some of this out before, but we'd never heard about him posing at an investor who had assets in the millions. We hadn't heard that before. All of the details that he is describing here today, Vicky, are done on purpose. They're for a reason. And it's for an audience, not just in that federal courthouse, not for this judge in federal court. It's also being done because he is being prosecuted on parallel tracks. He is being prosecuted both in the federal court, which he has now pled guilty to, but he's also being prosecuted in state court. And the things that he has said today are really critical to what he's going to want to do later today. And what he's going to want to do later today is try to do the first step in pushing the pause button on the state case, because the state case is the one that is really at the front of our minds, because it was supposed to begin on September 8th. He was supposed to go to trial for second-degree murder on September 8th. He wants to press pause on that, even though he's pled guilty.
Laura, I'm going to interrupt you for one moment. We've got the U.S. District Attorney speaking right now. Let's listen in.
Along the route he knew Mr. Thompson would take and positioned himself to carry out the plan. Then, on a sidewalk on West 54th Street, the defendant murdered Mr. Thompson, shooting him from behind with a 9mm handgun equipped with a silencer. He shot Thompson twice at close range. The second shot came as Mr. Thompson turned and faced the defendant. The defendant did this as everyday New Yorkers walked nearby, and while the rest of the city woke up to start their day. Mangione then ran away, leaving Mr. Thompson to die. The defendant committed this murder in an attempt to draw public attention to his dislike of certain businesses. But we live in a civilized society governed by the rule of law. We debate, we disagree, we protest. We do not commit murder. No grievance, political belief, or ideological cause can ever justify murder. There can be no celebrity in assassination. Any person who celebrates, encourages, or excuses actions like these is fundamentally wrong. Mangione attempted to send a public message through violence, but the message that emerges today is very different. Violence is not a legitimate instrument to promote any political or social message. And those who resort to violence in an effort to advance their beliefs will be prosecuted, convicted, and put in jail. Today, the Southern District of New York, together with our law enforcement partners, writes the final chapter of Mangione's federal prosecution. Now, he stands convicted in federal court and faces life in prison. One other point that's important to note. While the defendant pled guilty, our office does not have a plea agreement with him. Instead, he pled open, which means he pled guilty to all pending counts in the indictment. There are no accommodations or concessions, and we are free to seek the maximum penalty under the law. I'd like to thank the dedicated prosecutors of our office's Violent Organizations and Crime Unit, who are beside me, for their remarkable efforts to bring this case. I would also like to thank the NYPD and the FBI, whose tireless and incredibly sophisticated investigative efforts made this conviction possible. Finally, I want to express on behalf of all of us here our deepest sympathy and compassion for the many family members and friends of Brian Thompson. Mr. Thompson's family and many of his friends were in court for the guilty plea today. I know they will have an opportunity to be heard at sentencing. We all stand in awe of their love for their family and for their friend, and their unwavering commitment to seeing justice done in this case. We hope they can take some solace in the fact that from the beginning, we have brought the full force of the federal government to bear in this case. In this prosecution, we have consistently pursued the maximum penalties under the law as necessary and just punishment for these crimes. The result achieved today now allows our office to seek the maximum penalty allowed, life imprisonment, which, as I've conveyed to Mr. Thompson's family, is what we intend to seek. I'll now turn it over to Commissioner Tisch.
Good afternoon. Thank you, U.S. Attorney McDonald. And thank you to the prosecutors and the federal law enforcement partners.
You have just listened to the U.S. District Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jamie McDonald, explaining how this concludes the federal prosecution in this case. Now, let me bring in Laura Jarrett and Misty Maris. Misty, your turn now. So he is now convicted in federal court. And what I thought was interesting is McDonald said that he pled guilty. It's open. There is no agreement. So it's not a deal per se, right? There's not going to be any sort of leniency in exchange for this plea.
So an open plea is when somebody pleads guilty to those top level charges and there is no concession of a lesser included offense or something. Sometimes you see somebody plead guilty to something lesser than they're charged with. That is not what happened here today. Prosecutors have said that they can seek the maximum penalty under the law, that they are able to actually, when they submit their recommendations to the judge, they can actually submit a recommendation for life. They're not bound by anything. So let's just break down a little bit how sentencing works, because I think that's important. The defense would make a recommendation. Everything in the federal court is calculated by federal guidelines, the severity of the crime, and then there's other things that you can get concessions. Then the prosecution would make a recommendation, probation department, judge ultimately decides.
Okay, and when do we, we're going to go to a break, but I'm going to keep you here. Sam Brock standing by outside. We'll be right back right here on NBC News Daily after this short break. Welcome back to NBC News Daily this Friday, where we continue to follow breaking news at this hour. Luigi Mangione has pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges linked to the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. I've got with me on set Laura Jarrett and Misty Maris to walk us through all of the legal ins and outs here in terms of what this means for Mangione. We also understand that his attorneys have now filed to dismiss the state murder charges in a case that was supposed to begin, I think you said, September 8th,
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
So what does this mean for Mangione right now as it pertains to the state case and the rest of the legal proceedings?
Yeah, so now that his attorneys have run into state court saying, let's push pause on the state case that was supposed to go on September 8th, a judge in New York is going to be the one that's going to decide whether or not the arguments that he's making.
Laura,
go ahead.
prosecutors are speaking now. We're going to go ahead and listen in.
Of truth and accountability. Thank you, Commissioner. I also like to thank the Altoona Police Department of Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, who helped facilitate the extradition to New York. We're incredibly grateful to our partners, and we wish the Thompson family comfort and strength as the legal process continues. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you. Thank you all.
We're going to go back. Laura, finish your thought.
So the defense team is now made their motion in state court, which is essentially to say, Judge, our client has now pled guilty to a federal crime of stalking. That federal crime of stalking means that we should be able to take the benefit to invoke, to use a New York law which says you cannot be prosecuted twice for the same criminal transaction. Their entire argument is that the criminal transaction here is not going to just be when he pulled the trigger. It's going to be everything leading up to it, because they want to have it all in a big ball to kick it out of state court. So now it's going to be up to a judge to say, all right, does double jeopardy actually apply here or not? The answer to that is anything but straightforward. If anyone tells you, oh, this is a slam dunk anyway, don't listen to him, because it's actually very, very tricky and complicated. And that state court judge is going to want to take his time. He's going to want to hear arguments. He's going to want to hear testimony potentially. And so all of that is going to take time, which means the September 8th date just can't happen, because the judge has to go through all that. He's not going to go seat a jury on September 8th only to have all of this be for naught if double jeopardy attached. Does that make sense? So that he's going to want to say, let's take our time, let's bring everybody in, let's punt this jury trial for a while. And he may actually have to stand trial one day. It's just not going to happen on September 8th.
So for all intents and purposes, we are likely to see a pause in the state murder case against Luigi Mangione, despite the fact that he did plead guilty today in the federal case on the 2 stalking charges. Misty, what does Judge Garnett in the federal case now need to do, and what's the timeline?
So the next step is there's a sentencing hearing that's scheduled in December. In that interim period, probation office will prepare a report. They'll speak to Luigi Mangione. They'll prepare a report about certain risk factors that go into that determination. The prosecutors will also make a recommendation. In federal court, it's all about sentencing guidelines. So there's certain things that make a crime more serious and thus a higher penalty, and some things that inure to the benefit. Pleading guilty is a thing that inures to the defendant's benefit. The defense will make a recommendation, and then the judge ultimately holds all of the power and will make that decision.
And we're not going to hear anything more from Mangione at this point. Right now, it's in the judge's hands. Is that right?
He would be in his best interest not to say anything further at this point.
Okay, and we're looking at 25 to 30 years to life in prison as the sentence?
Well, so it looks like there's a letter from the defense which says that prosecutors have said that a guideline range would be 25 to 30, but you heard that presser. They're not bound by anything. They could still potentially seek a higher guideline range, which could be anything up to life. And Vicki, it's important to note, in federal court, there is no probation with a life sentence. State court, that's different. If it's life, it is life. If it's less than life, it's that many years.
All right. Keep it right here, folks. Misty Maris, Laura Jarrett, thank you so much. We're going to continue following this breaking news involving Luigi Mangione, who has now pleaded guilty to 2 federal charges linked to a murder. We'll be right back after this short break. NBC News Daily, where I am joined by NBC News correspondent Sam Brock, who's standing by live outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, where Luigi Mangione has just pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges. Sam, tell us what happened in court today. And I do understand that the Thompson family has also just put out a statement.
They did. Vicky, let's start there. So Luigi Mangione, about a half an hour ago, pleaded guilty to both counts, both federal stalking counts in this case. They both carry potentially a maximum sentence of life behind bars. What they ended up coming to terms with is not actually a plea agreement with the prosecutors, but an open plea for Mangione that he was guilty of these charges. And he also outlined, Vicky, the fact that he killed Brian Thompson. He described the manner Mangione did in which he printed out his 3D weapon, the ghost gun, then drove to New York and killed him. But before that, had impersonated an investor, called UnitedHealthcare, and found out where this conference was taking place so that he could stalk Brian Thompson and kill him. No remorse or color beyond that. I think it's just worth stating it. In terms of the family and what they're saying today, we observed the emotion in real time. They were all sitting 2 rows in front of me. You had his ex-wife and Brian Thompson's mother sitting together. His ex-wife was crying, dabbing her face with a tissue. His mom was actually comforting her throughout the entire proceedings. She had her arm around his ex-wife's shoulder. You could just sort of see the consolation there. In terms of what the family is saying right now, and I want to quote them directly, they say that this is a step toward justice. And specifically, and bear with me right now, today's guilty plea marks an important step toward justice for Brian and for our family. While nothing will ease the pain of losing him, we are grateful, they say, that the federal justice system has held the person responsible for this heinous act accountable. Here's the key to all of this, Vicky. They say, now we look to the court to ensure that sentencing reflects the severity of this crime. We remain mindful that additional proceedings in New York and Pennsylvania are still to come, and we will continue to seek the justice that Brian deserves. Okay, the sentencing part of this first, Vicky. You heard today the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York saying they're going to be pursuing a life sentence. Well, that's not the guidelines that were put forward. And again, it's non-binding. But this open plea led to the federal government coming up with sentencing guidelines of 290 to 365 months, or translation, 25 to 30 years. Luigi Mangione is 28 years old. That would presumably, if he were sentenced to the higher end of that, put him into his 50s behind bars. However, this is completely within the judge's discretion. So I think the family right now, to your original point, is saying, yes, he has pleaded guilty. Yes, he has taken responsibility for the death and the killing of our beloved father, son, cousin, brother. And he also now should be paying the toll of that, which is a full extent of the law, full time behind bars. Not clear whether the judge is going to see it in those terms or not, but it is, again, her discretion. With in terms of the next steps here, you have a New York State case that was supposed to begin in less than a month from now, September 8th. That's the second-degree murder charges and the weapons charges. Now, you just had Luigi Mangione in court behind me say, I killed Brian Thompson. I printed out the gun. I went down there. I shot him with the intent to kill. He's going to stand murder trial a month from now after he's already pleaded guilty. I mean, clearly you're going to have some conversations around the admissibility of his statement in federal court for what would be allowed in state court. And you also have his defense team saying that they're trying to explore double jeopardy now. How can you try someone twice for the same crime? When it comes to the federal law, I will tell you, federal law acknowledges that you can charge the same crime in different jurisdictions. They see it as different sovereignties. State law, and specifically New York State, is very different in the sense that New York believes that if there's the same underlining criminal action, then it potentially qualifies as double jeopardy. So you got all these moving parts and pieces, and then Pennsylvania too, where he has false impersonation and weapons charges in that state. So you have 3 different tracks of cases all going on simultaneously, one of which just ended in a guilty plea, the federal one, but you also have a murder case on the state level scheduled for a matter of weeks from now. All of these cross currents are going to have to be ironed out, but that's sort of like the big picture right now.
Sam, thank you. I'm going to toss it to our legal experts here on set. Misty, let me just start with you. The state is going to try to get this thrown out. So what happens, though, if they don't?
Yeah, so the defense has already made the motion. I mean, they had it ready to go very clearly, filed it. Prosecution is obviously going to oppose it, and then there will be that legal fight. Is the defense going to be successful? As we said, it's not a slam dunk. But what happens if they're not successful and eventually they have to go to state court? Practically speaking, it is very, very likely that his allocution, his statement that he made admitting guilt, would come into the state case. So he's going to have very few options to defend.
All right, and we're waiting for that federal sentencing on December 18th. Stand by. We're going to go to a short break, and we'll come right back here on NBC News Daily. Welcome back to NBC News Daily this Friday. If you are just joining us, we are following breaking news in the Luigi Mangione case, where he has just pled guilty to 2 federal counts of stalking linked to the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. And with me here on set, Laura Jarrett and Misty Maris, who are really giving us a schooling in the law right now because of this very unique case where you have a federal situation, but then you also have a state trial that was to begin. So let's set the scene for folks. Now with these 2 guilty pleas, this open plea, what does this mean for Luigi Mangione on the federal side of things, Laura?
So on the federal side, it's now going to be a fight about what that sentence should be. And we need a little bit of clarity because today we heard from the judge for the first time that potentially prosecutors would be okay with something short of a life sentence. This is it's not just stalking. It is stalking resulting in death. It is a serious federal crime. When we talk about it, I just want to make sure people understand the gravity of this is something that potentially carries life in prison. So it is no small thing. Again, it's going to depend on, essentially a bunch of different factors that the judge will decide, but it is a big deal. So now the judge is going to get dueling papers, a lot of paper, from the defense, from the prosecutor, and also from the probation department, who is going to interview Luigi Mangione about his life and find out what in the world happened to this man, somebody who came from a well-to-do family, someone who was well-educated, to suddenly fall off a cliff and shoot someone on the streets of New York in such a brazen fashion. And the probation department is going to sit down with him and really interrogate that. And some of that may be used in mitigation. We have already seen in his statements to the judge today talking about the experiencing pain, talking about his troubles in the past, physically, talking about his feelings about the healthcare industry. I would expect a lot more of that to come out in his interview with the probation department. And so once the judge has the benefit of all of those filings, by the way, she's only been on the bench for like 3 years, okay? This is somebody who is a seasoned federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. This is her first big high-profile case. So she knows a lot of eyes are on this.
You're talking about Judge Margaret Garnett.
She's going to want to do this very carefully. Not that anybody wouldn't, but she's going to want to take her time with this. She's going to get at the benefit of all this paperwork, and then she's going to make a determination on December 18th about his sentence. But he hasn't actually been convicted until that sentence comes down on December 18th.
Okay, so this is almost like if you were to do the analogy of buying a house, the offer has been accepted, but the deal has not been closed.
I love your consumer
analogy. That's how
for this murder
case,
but yes.
Usually I use a food analogy, but in this case, real estate.
Yeah, but that's the right way to look at it because it's not really fully baked until that sentencing is done and signed off.
Okay, so Misty, Laura just covered the federal side of things. We have this state case that was supposed to begin in less than a month from now. This kind of puts a pause on everything, and we understand that Mangione's attorneys have filed to dismiss the state charges altogether. What happens there? How likely is that to go through?
So no surprise that they were ready and waiting to file that document because they want to push that state court case back. They don't want to be going through a state trial if double jeopardy potentially attaches. So pleading guilty in the federal case at this time was really strategic. And this is what I would call a calculated risk. So they're hoping to get that state court case thrown out in its entirety. I think it's almost certain that prosecutors are absolutely going to push back. They're going to oppose that.
They're going to want to try the case in the state.
So the question is, what happens in the interim, right? What happens if the prosecutors are successful, the case ultimately does move forward to trial? Well, Luigi Mangione, it's very likely that everything he said in court today about his admission would come into that state case. So that will leave him with very few defenses. It would have to be some type of admission, maybe resurrecting that extreme emotional disturbance defense. You see the needle being threaded here with what he said in court. So there would be very few defense options that wouldn't be just admitting to committing the crime and trying to have some other mitigation with respect to the sentence.
You can't put that toothpaste back. Once he's said all this in court, it's open. And we should mention, we just got a statement from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office here in response to this situation, which again is happening in federal court. But now the DA's office is saying we're encouraged that Mr. Thompson's family received a measure of accountability today while federal sentencing is pending, because that's going to happen on December 18th. We are prepared to litigate defense motions, meaning all this back and forth about whether or not the state case should be kicked. That's the, sort of the defense motions are going to be coming because of that issue.
So this statement's coming from
the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This is the state office. They're saying the Manhattan District Attorney's Office remains committed to seeking justice for Mr. Thompson and family. Short story meaning we're not backing down from this fight. We are not going to lay down and say, okay, I guess case closed. I guess we're all going to go home, even though we didn't get to try our case. This is sort of they're putting their stake in the sand to say, we are still going to be here fighting this case. And we knew they were going to, because they've been talking about whether or not double jeopardy should apply for years now. Right? So Mangione,
they're prepared for this.
Mangioni's attorneys have been floating this since he was first prosecuted. They've been saying
made the motion.
They made this motion a long time ago, so they knew this was coming. Everybody sort of knew this was coming. That was why they've already sort of had this teed up so quickly.
Yeah, and Vicky, keep in mind, remember the push-pull of this case. It was who will go first, the Fed or the state? Well, the defense wanted the Fed to go first. Why? Because they could have had this double jeopardy argument had the federal trial been scheduled to go before. So all of this was really strategic when it comes to the timing and trying to get rid of that state court case.
So advantage to Mangione perhaps in this moment. I want to bring in Sam Brock, who has been inside the courtroom all morning, standing by outside the courtroom right now. I believe, do we have Sam? Because I want to ask him about what Mangione said, his demeanor, the tenor and tone inside the courthouse, as well as outside. It's been such a spectacle out there, Sam. I mean, people have crowdsourced $1.5 million for Mangione's defense fund. This is the first time we are seeing the victim's family inside the courtroom. Provide some background for us, some color as to how things went down today.
Do you know what's kind of interesting, Vicky, is we have covered other Mangione hearings before. We've covered Nicolas Maduro in federal court. I'm looking around right now. Yes, there are dozens upon dozens of TV cameras, but it's not sort of like the cacophony of media presence that we've seen at prior events. I don't know what to attribute that to. I will say that the entire complexion of the coverage of this case has changed in the sense that you have legacy broadcast networks like ours and TV stations and print journalism and digital journalism, and then all these people that call themselves the Mangionistas, who effectively have gained media credentials, even though they're either influencers or they're very passionate about Luigi Mangione and his stated cause against private health care. And so they've started to cover the trial as journalists. It's sort of like a compilation of all of those things, but it's not the sheer volume that we'd seen in previous hearings, for what it's worth. In terms of the tenor of Mangione today, it was interesting, first of all, to see his attorneys walk in. The Agnifolos met Dominic Gentili and the other U.S. attorneys, and they were smiling, they were shaking hands. They probably spent 10 or 15 minutes talking before Judge Garnett even walked into the courtroom. So it felt like, okay, a deal is in the air, right? And then about 2 or 3 minutes after that, then Luigi Mangione came in, and he was wearing tan prison gear, not a suit and tie as we'd seen him in previous hearings, which also seemed to indicate there was a strong likelihood he was going to plead guilty to something just based on his attire. His tone never changed. His tone was flat the entire time. Didn't smile as far as I could tell. Did greet his attorneys, but there wasn't any real emotion that was displayed. And he was given an opportunity to make some remarks, Vicky, and Mangione chose to sit down. She could have stood, sat down and read off of a sheet, and it probably only lasted 2 or 3 minutes tops. And it started with, the judge had prompted him by asking, what are you guilty of? What can you tell us about what happened? Why did you do it? And it started with an explanation of his back pain, and the fact that he'd been enduring back pain for the course of years. He was disappointed with his private health insurance. He had seen other patients that had suffered similarly. So right away, instead of just saying, here's what happened and I did it, he started sort of couching the reasons behind why. And then he offered some words that really, I would say, had everyone on edge. Literally, he said, I did go, and I'm going to read this if I can find it verbatim here, why he's guilty. He said, I shot Mr. Thompson in December with the intent to kill. He just flatly said it. Vicky Mangione also described the fact that he had a 3D printed gun that he made before he went to New York, brought that with him, and had spent months doing research. And maybe one of the most jarring details to come out in all of this is that Mangione himself described how he impersonated an investor because he knew that this investor conference was going on and that UnitedHealthcare was going to be in attendance, but he didn't know where it was. So he pretended to be an investor of a company, and I need to see the testimony specifically from court. I haven't seen the transcript yet, but I believe he said of one with assets of $50 billion. And he said this through an email to UnitedHealthcare. And he says they gave him the location of the conference. And that sort of catalyzed this entire process whereby Mangione ultimately pleaded guilty to cyber stalking, as Laura was just talking about, and then stalking interstate with the intent to kill, which are the 2 charges that he pleaded to, which carry potentially a life sentence. But the entire thing was surreal in the sense that you were hearing Luigi Mangione, for the first time, in his own words, describe his guilt, not just in the stalking charges, but in killing another human being, a 50-year-old father of 2, whose family members were all in court today. And he just said it on a flat line. I mean, there was no variation in his voice. The judge basically said, okay, I acknowledge what you're saying. You seem to be of right mind to make this. Because the other key point I would make that I don't think has been reported yet is the fact that she asked him initially, do you have mental illness? He said, no. Are you being treated for mental illness? No. Addiction? No. So she was trying to set a baseline. He was of sound mind, and that's where we leave it.
That is where we leave it, and it now will be in the hands of Judge Margaret Garnett. The next hearing scheduled for December 18th for the sentencing of Luigi Mangione in this case. Sam Brock, thank you very much. Keep it right here, folks. Up next, some of the other headlines that we are following today. Alec Murdaugh attending a pre-trial hearing today as both sides clash over the venue of his upcoming retrial, how his new legal battle could play out. And the USS Abraham Lincoln is set to be replaced over growing concerns about poor conditions for the sailors deployed to the Middle East, how soon they could be back on U.S. soil. Keep it right here. Alec Murdaugh is back in court today for a major hearing ahead of his murder retrial. This comes just months after his double murder conviction was thrown out. Today is the first time we are seeing Murdaugh in regular clothes, unshackled, since he was found guilty 3 years ago of murdering his wife and son. Now a judge is addressing several requests made by the prosecution and the defense, including a change of venue for the retrial. Murdaugh remains in prison. He is serving both federal and state sentences for financial crimes. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch is following all of this for us. So, Jesse, why is the defense arguing for a change of venue in this retrial? And have we heard from the judge? Have they made a ruling on that yet?
Yeah, Vicky, I'm going to check my computer because we were watching in real time. You just referenced the hearing. It is ongoing right now. It's been going on for almost 3 hours now. We're watching as the arguments continue, specifically over the change of venue. The defense wants to get this moved to Charleston. Specifically, you can see there Alec Murdaugh going into the courtroom earlier today. I do want to bring up what is the headline for us so far, which is that the judge has given a key win to the defense. She has granted them the ability to take the DNA from a mystery male that was found under Alec Murdaugh's wife Maggie's fingernails. The judge has granted the defense the ability to bring that DNA to an outside lab for some testing. And what the defense is pointing to is the ability of an outside lab, not a government investigative lab, an outside lab's ability to do a broader sweep of testing through genetic genealogy, something we've talked about in other murder cases before. And the state, for its part, had wanted to be able to do its own testing again before something like that would be handed over, before the raw, unprocessed sample of DNA would be handed over to the defense. The judge siding with the defense, saying they are going to be able to take control of that sample and bring it over to the lab. There are some stipulations on how that exactly has to unfold, but this is potentially crucial for the defense, gives them an opportunity to possibly be able to identify the person whose DNA was found under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails. And perhaps you can imagine from a defense strategy standpoint, that could be something that could be used to try to suggest that investigators have not found the actual killer. So that is something we'll be watching as this case moves forward.
Key evidence indeed. Jesse Kirsch, thank you very much. Now to some new developments in the wake of plunging morale on the USS Abraham Lincoln. That is an aircraft carrier stationed in the Middle East right now. A U.S. official telling NBC News the ship will be replaced with the USS Washington as military leaders raise concerns about fatigue facing U.S. service members. This comes as military parents speak to NBC News about the concerning conditions on board. One mother said that her son described it as, quote, a scene out of the American Horror Story. Other family members described food shortages and mental health struggles on the ship that has now been at sea for more than 240 days consecutively. You can see there on your screen some of the small portions of food that's being served in pictures that were sent directly to us from a sailor's mother. A Navy official is rejecting the earlier reports of an uptick in mental health issues aboard the Lincoln. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth called media reports on the conditions completely misrepresented, while acknowledging that some deployments are longer than others. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins me now from the front of the North Lawn there. So, Monica, the Defense Secretary Hegseth, he's denying these reports, but behind closed doors, what are the conversations within the administration right now about morale and what's going on with these service members?
Yeah, the defense secretary is saying one thing, but certainly hearing from the families of these soldiers, we're talking about around 5,000 service members who are on this ship currently. And of course, it may not be a universal feeling, but at least for many, many of them, some of whom we've been able to speak to their family members, there are mounting concerns about the conditions and also just this question of when they will be able to return home. If you think about it, they really haven't been able to get to a port in this entire year, even since December. Typically on these kinds of deployments, they would be able to get to dry land at least for a day or two before potentially going back out to sea. Here is, in the words of one mother of a soldier who is aboard that ship, how she's feeling.
It's been a feeling of powerlessness. This has been trending and spiraling downward since about March or April, with no supplies, food shortages, low morale, a lot of talking about death. It's been concerning.
And again, this is coming directly from some of those soldiers who are aboard the carrier, who are, of course, communicating with their family members in real time, Vicki.
Yeah, Monica. Well, now the USS Washington is at least on its way to essentially swap with the Lincoln. But how soon could these service members finally get off of that ship, finally get back on land?
And that's still an open question because that new ship has to make its way. There has to be kind of a handoff procedure, which could take a couple of days. And then eventually, once the USS Lincoln is cleared to come back to its home base, which is around San Diego, that in and of itself would take a couple of weeks. So we're still talking a little while before they will get home, but they are now at least being told they will be heading in that direction soon. Vicki?
All right. Monica Alba, live from the White House for us this Friday. Monica, thank you. Keep it right here, folks. Much more news straight ahead. You're watching NBC News Daily. And a reminder, you can watch us for free anytime, 24/7 on our streaming network. It's called NBC News Now. Do it in all the places where you get your news on the go, like YouTube, Hulu, Roku, and, of course, Peacock. A lawyer turned lifeguard is making waves in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. The 42-year-old doing exactly what a lot of people wish they could do, take the summer off to pursue a dream. He's also making history. Mark Seagraves from NBC Washington has his story.
This is the best office anybody could have.
For the past 15 years, Ben Schweer's office has been a courtroom, but the Pittsburgh attorney decided he wanted to take the summer off and live and work in Rehoboth Beach after a visit a few years ago.
Just fell in love with the area. Knew I wanted to come back for an extended stay, and so here I am. I felt like I needed to kind of recharge my batteries.
So Schweer's applied to be a lifeguard.
There was a pre-season tryout where we swam in a pool, did some running, did push-ups and all those things. And I was accepted based on my performance during that. And I thought, that was a breeze. I'll be fine.
At 42 years old, that makes Schweer's the oldest rookie lifeguard in the more than 100-year history of the Rehoboth Beach Patrol. Schweer's admits it hasn't been as easy as he thought it would be.
I got down here and I learned that we then had a 6-week boot camp for the rookies. And I will say, again, I've been an athlete my whole life. It was by far the most difficult thing I've done physically ever. I was completely exhausted every day for the 6 weeks, would go home and just kind of crumple over.
Nico Caceres is the Beach Patrol captain and has seen Schweer's impact on the younger lifeguards.
He's an excellent role model for the 18-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, and 20-year-olds coming up. It's like how you should be composing yourself as a professional lifeguard and as a professional lawyer.
As you might expect, being the oldest rookie, the younger lifeguards gave Schweer's a nickname.
So there are a lot of nicknames on the patrol because we're kind of like a team. Mine and it stuck is Uncle Ben. And I think it's pretty obvious why they went with Uncle Ben. Most of my coworkers here, my fellow guards, are probably half my age, but I think that I'll be friends with them for as long as I'm alive.
Sitting atop his lifeguard chair, Schweers reflects on what this summer job has taught him.
So I've been surprised by how much my story has resonated with other people, but I think the big takeaway is that change is okay, and it's okay to break out of the mold, so to speak, even if it's for a little bit.
And all that training in the beginning of the season that left him exhausted has paid off, having made 2 rescues so far this summer.
My first one was a couple weeks ago. A young boy was caught in a rip current. He was on a boogie board and getting swept out. I whistled at him to try to get him to paddle back in. It was clear that he wasn't going to be able to do that. So I went out and I brought him in, and it was a really great feeling. There's something about diving into the ocean and pulling another human being who's in trouble out and making sure that they're safe. There's nothing quite like that.
We're glad he is out there. Our thanks to Mark Seagraves. All right, here's what's trending right now. Heated rivalry welcoming some new faces for season 2. Schitt's Creek actor Emily Hampshire and young Royals star Edvin Reading joining the hit hockey romance show, along with other Canadian actors. Stars Connor Story and Hudson Williams, of course, they will be back as well. Season 2 premieres spring of 2027. Listen up, Ted Lasso fans. AFC Richmond is finally taking home a title. The premiere episode of season 4 set a new viewing record for Apple TV with more than 296 million minutes watched on August 4th and 5th. That is according to Nielsen ratings data. The new season comes after a 3-year hiatus, and it follows Ted Lasso coaching a women's soccer team. And you remember viral Australian breakdancer Rachel Gunn, known as Ray Gunn. She's stepping out with a new Netflix documentary. We are getting our first look at the film, recounting her infamous performance at the 2024 Paris Olympics and what happened afterward. Here's a look.
Right before the Olympics, I went to my therapist, panicked. She was like, "What's the worst that could happen? The whole world could laugh at me." She's like, "Do you think that's reasonable?"
All right, this is part of Netflix's Untold sports documentary series. Untold Ray Gunn, Breaking Badly, premieres September 1st. I mean, can't get a better title than that. Keep it right here, folks. I'm Vicki Nguyen. Thanks for being with me. You are watching NBC News Daily. We'll be right back. Friday. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Vicki Nguyen. NBC News Daily starts right now. Today is Friday, August 14th, pleading guilty. A stunning admission from Luigi Mangione in court today to accept a plea in connection to the 2024 murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. What he said in court and how it could impact his state murder trial. Prison investigation, the DOJ accusing California of failing to protect incarcerated women from sexual abuse and harassment. The disturbing details and the allegations and the changes the state is now promising to make. Custody battle, a fight playing out in Texas between a newborn baby's parents and their surrogate. Who the baby could end up with as this unprecedented legal saga unfolds. And secret sauce, a Wired writer taking a closer look at McDonald's loyalty program. And it turns out it is not just tracking his rewards points, how the fast food giant is using your data to predict your behavior and your next order. Welcome to NBC News Daily this Friday. We begin right here in New York with a stunning confession from the man accused of killing a top U.S. healthcare executive. Just over an hour ago, Luigi Mangione walked into a Manhattan federal courtroom wearing tan prison clothes and shackles. He pleaded guilty to 2 stalking charges in his federal case stemming from the shooting death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. As part of the guilty plea, Mangione confessed to the crime. He told the judge, quote, "Before traveling to New York, I used a 3D printer to make a gun and silencer. I emailed UnitedHealthcare with the intent to shoot Brian Thompson. On the morning of December 4th, 2024, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan in his back." The judge accepted Mangione's guilty plea. His sentencing will take place in December. Here's what we heard from U.S. prosecutors just last hour.
The defendant committed this murder in an attempt to draw public attention to his dislike of certain businesses. But we live in a civilized society governed by the rule of law. We debate, we disagree, we protest. We do not commit murder.
Today's events are now raising serious questions about Mangione's upcoming state murder trial, which was scheduled to begin next month. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is standing by outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Sam, you were inside that courtroom when we heard from Mangione himself about this crime. What did he say in front of the court today? And what are we hearing from his attorneys now who want the state murder case to be dismissed?
Yeah, that just came out within the last hour or so, Vicki, that his attorneys are already asking for double jeopardy to be exercised in the state murder charges. I will say the big question hanging over all of this was obviously whether or not Luigi Mangione was going to plead guilty to these 2 federal charges, which he did. But even if he does plead guilty, how much is he really going to say? And the answer, Vicki, is a lot. Right? He started his remarks. The judge said to him, "I want to know why you're guilty. What are you pleading guilty to?" And what happened? Mangione decided in a very low-key tone, in the sense that there wasn't a lot of emotion in his voice. He basically read it in one sort of monotone. He did break a little bit during the delivery. It was slow, but it was very detailed. He said that after years of experiencing back pain and seeing others experience pain and not really being able to have any sort of assistance in terms of what he thought was adequate through the private health care system, he felt like he had to take action. So he's already starting with an explanation, it sounded like, of why this was justified. And then he said, you read a portion of this a second ago, that he went to New York, he used a 3D gun that he printed outside of the city. And then this might be the most shocking aspect of all of it, Vicki, had reached out to UnitedHealthcare. Mangione did after he found out that this UnitedHealthcare investors conference was taking place, and basically was an imposter, posed himself as an investor of a company with $50 billion in assets. I wanted to report that earlier. I wasn't sure if that was actually the number he cited, but it was. That's a mega-sized company, and was able to procure, he says, through UnitedHealthcare, the location of the conference, went down and shot Brian Thompson in cold blood with the intent to kill him. All these were words that came out of Luigi Mangione's mouth today. I will say, his attorney, Karen Agnifilo, did respond after the fact. Following her request to try to dismiss the state case on the grounds of double jeopardy, she described what sounded like almost an explanation from his vantage point. Take a listen.
As Luigi explained in court today, he endured years of severe, debilitating pain following a broken back while struggling to navigate our healthcare and health insurance systems. Like the thousands of people who have reached out since this tragedy to share their own experiences, he believed that the system had failed him and destroyed his life.
Vicki, Brian Thompson's family, probably 9 or 10 members of it, was sitting in court today. His ex-wife crying as she saw Mangione for the first time. Obviously, they feel like they have some sense of justice in all of this, but they said that the sentence reflects the severity of the crime. Vicki?
Sam, what about the atmosphere outside the court? We know that supporters of Mangione, you call them Mangionistas, raised $1.5 million for his legal defense fund. In court hearings past, we've seen a real spectacle out there. What has that been like, and how is the family doing?
Sure.
Have they put out a full statement now that these guilty pleas have come in?
Yeah. For sure. Let's get into that. First of all, in terms of just a scene setter, previously during hearings, we saw large groups of supporters of Luigi Mangione wearing the green Luigi outfits with signs, very vocal. The largest footprint in this case might be those journalists, the Mangionistas that you just referred to, who started as either influencers or those who were particularly invested in Luigi's story and became accredited, if you want to use the term journalist. They got credentials to go and cover this as such. They were inside the courtroom. So that was sort of a unique twist. We did not see the video that you're looking at right now on your screen from previous hearings. There was nothing like that, though there is a lot of media camera presence in general. In terms of what the family said, they said, Vicki, that this was a step in the right direction for justice. But they said, now we look to the court to ensure that sentencing reflects the severity of the crime. We remain mindful that additional proceedings are going on right now in New York and Pennsylvania, and we would like still to come. We will continue to seek the justice that Brian deserves. That is a nod to the fact that these were 2 federal charges that were not murder. There is a second-degree murder charge on the state level that is scheduled to begin that trial, Vicki, on September the 8th. There's also charges in Pennsylvania as well. What happens to those cases is an open-ended question right now.
Just one chapter in a long legal journey ahead. Sam Brock, thank you. I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris, working overtime, who has a brand new giant stack of papers because you just got the motion on double jeopardy for the state case.
Yes.
Walk us through it.
Okay, so this was ready to be filed. No question about it. The minute Luigi Mangione entered that plea, we saw Karen Agnifilo outside the courtroom saying, we are filing our motion, and here it is. So it brings us through the case, and it actually explicitly states some of what Luigi Mangione said in court, that he pled guilty to the crime of possessing a gun, fired a person, Brian Thompson, on the morning. The reason that language really matters, the argument in this motion is that double jeopardy attaches on the state case because he's now pled guilty in the federal case. All of the charges, the 2 murder charges the murder charge as well as the weapons charges, those all have to be thrown out. The motion actually goes, though, a bit further, Vicki. It talks about coordination between the prosecutions, saying the state court case will go first when this case first began. Who will go first? The state wanting to go first. Talks about representations by prosecutors at the state level made in court about wanting the state court case to go first so they weren't jeopardied out. So it's actually taking some arguments that had been made in court previously and using it to emphasize the argument that this case needs to be thrown out. The defense saying, well, actually, prosecutors have already acknowledged that double jeopardy attaches. That's why they wanted to go first. And now, because the federal court plea is in, this case should be thrown out in its entirety. We saw a statement from the state level prosecutors that said, we're ready to litigate and fight this. So I would expect their response to be coming in the coming weeks, but not before September 8th. I don't think we'll be seeing a trial anytime soon.
Okay, so that September 8th, unlikely to happen. Missy, what do you make of the defense strategy here?
Well, I think it's a calculated risk, Vicki, because there's no guarantee, even though we see some very strong arguments made in this double jeopardy motion, there is no guarantee that state case actually goes away. There are exceptions to the rule. And because prosecutors will oppose it, this is anyone's guess the way it turns out. It's by no means a slam dunk. So what does that mean? It means Luigi Mangione could be in a state court trial someday down the line. And now
which could be years away.
Could be. Yes, we don't. However long this takes to play out and then get that back on track certainly could be far away. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But what does that mean now that he has pled guilty? He has made a statement under oath in federal court as to what he did that day. That is likely to come into the state case. And so he will not have too many options when it comes to a defense. He will have to concede on the actual guilt of it all, and maybe try and resurrect that extreme emotional disturbance defense where he would attack state of mind that could reduce a second-degree murder charge to a manslaughter charge if successful. So this is a million miles down the road, but again, the federal court plea came with no guarantees by prosecutors as to what they would ask for. The judge is in control. So when I say calculated risk, he's still facing a potential life behind bars on the federal side with no guarantee of actually kicking the state court case out. But the strategy behind it, if you're going to plead guilty in that federal court case, it was going to come before this trial because it does give the ability to try and narrow what you're talking about and get rid of the state court.
So now the judge, Garnett, she has until December 18th, which is the next federal court hearing, to say what his sentence will be. As Sam Brock was reporting, Luigi Mangione is 28 years old. If he gets the 30 years in prison, he's 58 when he gets out. But there is a potential he spends the rest of his life in bars for pleading guilty to these two federal counts. Is that right?
So everything is about the federal guidelines, and they're advisory for the judge, but the judges generally follow them. So what we heard in court today was that there had been some discussion between the defense and the prosecutors that the guidelines number would be somewhere around what you said, 25 to 30 years. That being said, prosecutors stood on the courthouse steps and said, we agreed to nothing. We can still seek that maximum penalty. The probation department will weigh in. They will do an assessment of what they think is appropriate for Luigi Mangione. The defense will obviously say something that's lesser, and mitigating factors will come into play, maybe even something with regard to his mental state at the time of the killing, and likely saying that he's taken accountability by pleading guilty. Ultimately, though, it will be up to the judge, and the judge isn't bound by anything. The judge could impose that maximum sentence.
Missy, are they going to take anything into account in terms of his behavior thus far in prison, anything like that?
All of those things go into the probation report, including extensive interviews with Mangione, which is why when I say calculated risk, sometimes those probation interviews, if there's relevant information, that could also make it into the state court case.
Will any of that become public? Will we see what he said to the probation officers?
So we may see it in the context of what is filed with the court on the defense and prosecution side. We sometimes see information from what probation has recommended. A lot of it, though, if it relates to mental health treatment, medical treatment, that can be confidential.
Okay.
But we will get an idea from those submissions on both sides as to where probation ended up falling.
All right, NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris, as always, thank you so much. Much more to break down here after that stunning admission from Luigi Mangione in court today. Stay with us. We're back after this short break. We are continuing to follow the breaking news out of New York, where Luigi Mangione pleaded guilty to federal charges connected to the 2024 shooting death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris and NBC News correspondent Sam Brock both join me now. Misty, let me begin with you. You just printed out the motion to dismiss the charges in the state case. So that was supposed to happen after this federal case. Now he's pleaded guilty. What does that mean moving forward?
So the defense is looking to toss that state court case out in its entirety. All of the murder charges, the weapons charges, they're saying that due to his guilty plea in federal court, double jeopardy attaches. And that means under the state law, which is more expansive than the federal law, the state court case cannot go forward. And something interesting in the arguments that are being made by the defense, double jeopardy, this is not the first time anybody's heard these words in this case. They have been shouting from the rooftops about it since the beginning. They, in fact, made a motion about it that was dismissed by the judge as premature because the federal court case didn't have a disposition. So now they're actually taking certain arguments that the prosecutors had made about moving the state court case forward, saying that prosecutors acknowledge double jeopardy is an issue and using that to bolster their argument to get these charges dismissed. Prosecutors today, the district attorney saying they're going to push back on this. They're ready to litigate this issue at the state level. So we'll have to see how this turns out. It's by no means a slam dunk, but the defense definitely has a leg to stand on here.
And that's what the defense is saying. The state, though, making it clear they do want to pursue the case. I want to bring in Sam Brock, who's been inside the courtroom and is standing by outside now. Sam, tell us a little bit more about what you heard from Mangione, what he revealed that we haven't heard before about his actions that day in December of 2024.
So what's really interesting to get into here, Vicky, is the fact that both Luigi Mangione, in his remarks in court today, and his attorneys, Karen Agnifilo and Mark Agnifilo, after the fact, both said, I take responsibility for killing Brian Thompson, but I was a victim of this system. We're talking about the private health care insurance system. I was enduring back pain for years. You didn't really know if there was going to be a guilty plea, what that would connote in terms of the responsibility he's taking for murdering, and again, his own words, I went to New York to kill Brian Thompson, murdering a 50-year-old father of two whose wife was in the court today crying as she saw Luigi Mangione for the first time and is looking for justice. I mean, if you were expecting any sort of nod to this grieving family, that's not what you got from Luigi Mangione, and it's also not what you got from his attorneys. Take a listen to Karen Agnifilo, who spoke after he pled guilty on those 2 counts today, and we'll talk on the back end.
As Luigi explained in court today, he endured years of severe, debilitating pain following a broken back while struggling to navigate our healthcare and health insurance systems. Like the thousands of people who have reached out since this tragedy to share their own experiences, he believed that the system had failed him and destroyed his life. Despite this being a single isolated event, Mr. Mangione has been unfairly treated since the outset in every way and has successfully fought off terrorism charges and the death penalty, while also fighting at the same time 2 simultaneous prosecutions in 2 jurisdictions who are trying to punish him twice for the exact conduct. He's been treated differently from every other defendant charged with this offense in New York.
So they're still, to this point in time, Vicky, talking about unfair treatment, even after their client just pleaded guilty to murder. In terms of sentencing, the date on that is going to be December 18th, so it's 4 or 5 months from now. The judge said that there is a guideline promoted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, which was basically 25 to 30 months. That's a guideline. She said it's going to be in her discretion. She's going to look at probation reports, pre-sentencing reports, and Mangione's future words himself to make that calculation. You just heard from his attorneys. We talked about what Mangione said in court today. We're going to find out a few months from now whether or not that means a life sentence or 25 to 30 years.
All right, Sam Brock, Misty Maris here in studio. Thank you both for your ongoing coverage in this breaking news case today. Meanwhile, hundreds of people evacuated from parts of Europe as multiple wildfires are burning there. The hardest hit areas as crews struggle to get ahead of the fast-moving flames. And Alec Murdaugh back in court today. The multiple issues on the table as prosecutors prepare to retry the former South Carolina attorney for murder. Following breaking news out of New York City, where Luigi Mangione, the man accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, pleaded guilty to 2 federal stalking charges. Mangione entered his plea early this morning in front of Thompson's family. He now faces a maximum penalty of life in prison. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. So, Sam, we learned a lot more about the murder from Mangione himself. What did he tell the court today?
For sure. So I think the top line, Vicky, in all this is that he pleaded guilty to those 2 charges. There was a lot of conversation and some whispers in legal corners about how this could be a plea agreement. Would he actually plead guilty to those specific charges? Would it be something lesser? Because presumably his side would be incentivized to do this to avoid the most serious punishment possible, which for a federal stalking charge, and it's 2 of them, interstate stalking and cyber stalking leading to the death of Brian Thompson, the possible life sentence that could await, that's the maximum in that case. Perhaps they were going for less. Well, either way, what we saw today was Luigi Mangione come into the courtroom wearing prison gear. So he was in this tan prison outfit. He was not handcuffed, but he was shackled in his feet, sat down, and you thought immediately, okay, this looks like there could be some sort of a deal that's coming at it. It actually turns out wasn't a deal. It was Mangione himself just pleading guilty to an open plea, which basically means that the feds came forward with what they thought the sentencing guidelines should be, 25 to 30 years, not a life sentence. And then the judge responded by first saying, are you guilty? Is this something that you can describe in terms of why it happened, what you actually did? Were you of sound mind when it happened? And Luigi Mangione went through line item by line item what transpired. He said, Vicky, that he had back pain for years, that he had felt a failure within the private health insurance industry, that he'd seen others struggling as well. He found out about this investor conference, and in his own words, it wasn't nurses and it wasn't patients who were there. It was executives and board members, and he had a real issue with that. So already right out of the gate, he's trying to contextualize the murder of a 50-year-old man who obviously was a father of 2 children as well. We also found out that Mangione posed as an investor who was representing a company that had something like $50 billion in assets, and he says UnitedHealthcare handed over the location of this investor conference and catalyzed the entire situation where he ended up stalking Brian Thompson, printing out a 3D weapon, coming down to New York in November, and then on December 4th, killing him in cold blood on the streets of Midtown Manhattan. All of this came out in court today. You mentioned that 25 to 30 months that the U.S. Attorney's Office has suggested to the judge. The judge said, look, it's my discretion. I'm going to take a whole bunch of things into account, including Mangione's own words. Now, this allocution, if you will, that's what you describe when he answers questions about his guilt and what happened. This was really just the facts. There's probably going to be another version of it where he has an opportunity to express remorse, but if there was any, it didn't come out of Luigi Mangione's mouth today. It didn't come from his attorneys either.
Sam, this is certainly not the end of the road legally. We still have until December 18th for the sentencing in the federal case. But we have this other date looming, September 8th. That was when the state murder case was supposed to start. It does not look likely that will happen. So walk us through the likely scenarios on the state side of things for Mangione.
Sure. For sure. We did hear from the Manhattan DA's office and Alvin Bragg today, who said, look, our attorneys have spent months, years, since December of 2024, working on this case. We planned on prosecuting that case. Now, they are glad, Bragg said in the statement, that there was a measure of accountability for the family here, but suggested they are ready to go if the state case moves forward. Now, again, this all comes down to the severity of the crimes, right? Mangione today did acknowledge he murdered another human being. And the judge said it is entirely possible they'll have a life sentence. So what would the point be of moving forward with the state charges unless it was really to sort of escalate them in some way or address a separate charge? But there's the whole double jeopardy conversation, because within minutes of this whole court hearing today, his attorneys, the Agnifolos, asked for that charge or charges to be dismissed so that there would be no state trial, which is supposed to take place, Vicky, in like 3.5 weeks. This is all happening in concert right now. No one has any answers, but we're expecting them from the courts. But the bottom line is you have Luigi Mangione on trial for murder, second-degree murder in New York State, after he just took the stand under oath today and said he murdered another man. And yet that may not be admissible in court. It's an open-ended question. And so a lot of legalities that need to be resolved here in the coming weeks.
All right, Sam Brock, thank you so much for your reporting from inside and outside the courtroom for us today on this breaking case involving Luigi Mangione. Folks, keep it right here. We've got a lot more news straight ahead on this half hour of NBC News Daily. We'll be back after a very short break.